Okay, and we're going. All right.
I'm looking for, and I'm bringing you over here to there.
All right. So thank you everybody for joining us today for the Tuesdays with CKLS. It's going to be kind of an overview and update of what we've been working with for the Strategic Planning Committee. So I wanted to remind everybody who's on the Strategic Planning Committee, and I'm going to forget names, so those of you that are on the committee, help me remember. We have Brandon from Hayes, Melanie from Salina, Denise from Concordia, Karen from Hoisington, Melissa, she's the Barton County appointee, is Sherry from Ellenwood? Yes.
Yes.
Sherry from Ellenwood.
Sherry from Downs.
Sherry from Downs.
Rachel
Steve,
from Beloit.
Rachel from Beloit. Steve from Ellis. Chris from
Stockton.
We have Patty, Diane, Christy, me, and Gail. Gail's on there as an advisory role. Those are the CKLS people. I feel like I'm missing somebody else. Missy? Did I miss Missy?
Yes,
Sorry
Missy's
about
there
that.
too. There's
Missy
6
too.
of us.
Yes, okay.
We've got a van full.
Yeah. And we've met 3 times, in January, February, and March. And so I have some discussion notes just to kind of go over what we met about, what we discussed, and what our plans are. So last fall in August, we did the SOAR analysis where we had the teams working together. We had all those flyers on the wall. Peggy took all that information and she correlated it and all that. And then we also took those strategic planning surveys that Gail sent out the end of last year, beginning of this year, and put them all in graph form. And Patty, if you can find those and send those out, then the link in the chat so they can link to those, that'd be awesome, because I didn't think about doing that. So our goals for our committee came from the SOAR analysis, from those strategic planning surveys. We looked at what was most important to you, our libraries, and decided our agenda based on those priorities. One of the big things was funding and looking at our standards and looking at our grants. Many felt like the grant process was very cumbersome, and many wanted to know what other systems are doing for standards or accreditation is what they call it. And so we really looked at each library systems, the 7 in the state. We looked at each of their strategic plans that they post every year. We looked at their budget, and we looked at their accreditation or their system plan setup. And we quickly realized that accreditation is one that where libraries could meet certain points and they'd be credited for a set amount of time, like 3 to 5 years, but they had points to meet, which were 40 to, I think, 100 points of things that every library had to meet. And you could get a pass, but you had to make sure you met it within a certain time period. And instead of simplifying, which is what we were looking for, and making it more straightforward, it made it seem a lot more complicated.
And what everyone realized as soon as they looked through those other accreditation standards was, if you didn't meet the accreditation standards, you didn't get any money. It was an all or nothing. It
was all or nothing. And so the committee quickly realized that accreditation, while there's some elements of the other system plans that we liked, we kind of realized that accreditation wasn't right for CKLS. So we do like the standards that are brought from the Kansas State Library Standards. They are created by library consultants and approved by the administrators of this library systems, and then they are approved by the State Advisory Board. I believe that's right. Yes. And so the standards that we have now, the 7 that we have now, are based upon the library standards from the 2016 Kansas Library Standards. And so we also looked about Are these standards suiting the need? Are they helping our libraries achieve the excellence that they can?
Or are
And
they busy work?
or are they busy work, and are they attainable? And we felt that the standards that we have now are good ones to keep. And if we add or change a standard, we want to be very strategic, open, of course, about it, and give each library time to adjust to the changes. In the past, we had changed incentives. It was all with an internal CKLS committee, and it was just changed. And I think a lot of people felt it was arbitrary, and we want to be more purposeful with our standards. And
they
our
felt also that in the past it had been punitive.
Punitive, correct. And the whole goal for the standards is to help our libraries achieve and maintain excellence and provide the best service to their patrons as possible. The other part that we looked at was how the additional grants were allotted. So you have the system grant, the full one that you do the end of the year survey for, and then you get a letter in February, and then you get the 3 disbursements throughout the year. And then there's all the other additional grants. And I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna share this one. And
do you know every single person I know who shares their screen has to talk themselves through it?
Just do, yeah.
I just do as well.
Okay. Because if I forget to talk it through, then I'm going to forget to push the share button. So, okay. I'm going to go to the CKLS website, if it'll let me. Did I lose you guys? Where did I go? There we go. Okay. And let's make that a little bigger. If you go to the CKLS website and then go to grants, it's going to take you to all the grants for 2020. And I'm just going to go to the overview so you can kind of see all the other additional grants we were talking about. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so there was concern that the grants gave the larger libraries an unfair advantage because there was so much paperwork to fill out and then reports to fill out at the end and tracking and all of that. So, hang on just a second. There we go. So we created a subcommittee, and it was a committee that was created from the Strategic Planning Committee, and it was volunteers. So these are the 4 people that volunteered to go on that committee. It was Brandon from Hayes, Melanie from Salina, Gail as an advisor, and Maribeth. And
one of the things I want to interject here, Maribeth,
sure.
is the question that someone had asked is, those are just the big libraries on there. And yes, that's true. Those are the people who volunteered, but every person who is serving on the Strategic Planning Committee knows that they're not just serving their library, they're serving libraries of all sizes. And I think that's important to note and to remember here. And
so I'm going to share this spreadsheet, and you'll get the final version of this in your packet that comes out to all the voting members that's getting put together this week. So we looked at all the money. It's still loading. Let's see if it goes through. We looked at all the money that we were putting into grants, excluding the system grant, the base grant. And we came up that we were putting $121,000 into grants. This is CKLS funds. So we looked at, I think this is the right one. Let me pull up the right one. We looked at several different ways of, I don't have it up here. We looked at several different ways of how to redistribute that money that would be fairest to all and useful to everybody. Yes. So here is the what the committee voted on to bring to the executive board. We looked at, go ahead.
The subcommittee met first and ran several models through, and then we brought those several models to the Strategic Planning Committee, and the Strategic Planning Committee unanimously voted on one of the models to take to the executive board.
Yes. I've got too many windows open and I'm losing track here. Okay. There we go. So this is the model that the Strategic Planning Committee voted for. It was taking that $121,000 and dividing it among our member public libraries in the same percentage as the per capita grant. So the census, you already get a per capita grant where if you're certain size of library, you get this much extra money per person. We took that same percentage of the per capita grant and we distributed that $121,000 the same way for what are we calling it? We're calling it the Public Services Allotment Grant. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this a lot in the March 23rd system plan discussion, and it will be reflected in the 2021 system plan as well.
And budget.
And budget. It's also reflected in the budget. Thank you.
Some of the models we looked at, we had just decided on one of the models that we would divide the money equally across the board. And some of us had concerns about that. Because this is money from CKLS, it must be spent in the year that it's received or encumbered. And for some of those smaller libraries, they would have to be spending a lot more money than they were used to. And there was concern amongst the committee that they would be spending just because they had to, not because it was what they needed. We also realized that the bigger the library, the more people you serve, and that means that you need more resources. But this is what we came to, where we use a model that's already in existence, where we use the math formula to determine the per capita addition. And we use that full amount of all those little piddly grants and use that per capita addition. And we came up with something that actually everybody was happy with. The executive committee was pleased, and all of the committee members. As I said, it was a unanimous vote across the board to adopt this. So every library will be getting more money, and that will be based on your population. And that right now is based on the 2010 population. When the 2020 census results come out, your regular per capita grant will adjust, as well as this public library service allotment. And that could be up or down depending on where you fall on the census. That's one of the reasons we're really encouraging libraries at the local level to get your community in for the census.
And I did notice on my chart that it's not complete on that chart. I'll have to correct the one. I'm sorry, guys. Today has not been my day.
Melissa wants us to review which grants were replaced. So now the grants that have been rolled into one, there is only one true competitive grant anymore, and that is the Continuing Education Conference Grant. That one still exists. The executive board believes that continuing education and conference opportunities can really make a difference in the library and therefore in the community. And so they voted to keep that intact. Everything else has been rolled in. So in 2021, there will be no programming grant, no storytime grant, no advocacy grant, no competitive grant like facilities, materials, equipment, no technology grant. What else? It's a lot of things got rolled in.
They're all right. They're all listed right here. Annual advocacy conference, conference they're keeping, the 3-year competitive grant, facilities, equipment and materials, that 3-year one. Competitive CE grant, that is different than the CE allotment. That is an additional CE grant. The annual materials grant, which we just started this year. The programming grant, the storytime grant, and the technology improvement grant.
So yes, so this is the last year that libraries will be eligible for any of these. And so I would encourage you to go ahead and apply for these if it's something that you need in your library. So what will happen then is that we'll offer more training for boards and librarians on long-range planning. And so if your library is going to need computers in the next couple of years, you'll not be able to get computers or money from CKLS. What you will need to be able to do is to set aside money for those future purchases. So one of the reasons that the Strategic Planning Committee wanted to do this is because they could see how much time the consultants were spending just on managing grants and standards. And they really wanted to be able to simplify that so that consultants could get out into libraries and do actual consulting instead of just being paper managers.
Yeah. So I will get that chart corrected at the bottom, but it is broken down by that same percentage. I'll send that out at the end of the day.
Steve says for really small libraries who may not be able to swing matching funds, there will be special consideration for them in regards to conference. And Steve's kind of right about that. The conference has no matching amount.
Yeah. And then Linda Scott mentions part of why we spend less is because we have less to spend. But
yes,
we also,
true.
Yes. But we also acknowledge that every library has, no matter the size, has a limited budget, has limited staff, and has limited options. Okay, so that is, let me move this over.
That's the biggest change.
That's the biggest change, and that's the big bulk of what we've done in the last 3 months, and we did that in 2 months' time and brought that to the executive board. We also considered school funding at that time. We wanted to make sure that our school districts, because even if they have a school library, the first thing that school districts cut for funding is funding for school libraries. Many of the schools, if they have any staff working there, it would be a paraprofessional that is only a few hours a week, may have multiple libraries that they have to share their time between. If they do have a library media specialist, which is somebody that has an education degree and a library degree, they are split between all the libraries in the district and have limited time. Many of the school districts don't have any kind of material budget for the library, and it's very much a bare bones scenario. One school district the library had been closed, and the students themselves raised money and did all the work to reopen their school library. And so
Maribeth looked at what the schools in the past few years have applied for, and it was almost exclusively for materials and continuing education. And the committees took that into account when they made the decision on school funding.
Yeah. And so the committee also voted, and I believe it was unanimous on this as well, to provide each school district $500 a year. This is not taking any money away from the public. This is additional funding. And then the schools would do a year-end report just like the public libraries do. And so there'd still be that same accountability that the public libraries have. Okay. And
there's a limit on what that school library funding can be spent on, just as there is with CKLS funding.
It has to be spent in the school library. It can't go to another part of the school.
Plus, it has to be shared if there's more than one library in that district that
yes,
are member libraries.
Yes, thank you. That's a good point. Thank you, Missy. Other things that our committee has been discussing, and these are kind of more discussion points at this point, and we're still waiting to have some action plan on them, is talking about what happens when a community can no longer support a library.
We had that kind of pop up a couple of years ago where the library, they just couldn't get a librarian in, and they thought that they were just going to have to close the library. And so I worked very closely with them on that process. When a community can no longer support a library, there is actually, in fact, a series of steps that you need to go through. Because the libraries are legally established through the state of Kansas, they need to go through that process in reverse and dissolve the library. Funding then dissolves at the support, the taxing money is no longer for the local library. That would then be part of the CKLS taxing base. And so it's about a 3-year process to dissolve a public library. One of the things that really brought this discussion to the forefront was the census, and we were talking about where we thought our communities would be. And Diane is in Bison, which is already a small community, and she thought they would drop significantly with the census. And so we thought that it was time to start talking about being proactive, being empathetic, and very compassionate, and having some steps in place for those communities that really just can no longer support a public library, and to talk about ways to positively move through that process with the community, and then what opportunities would be available for that collection and that building and things like that. And so that is something that I will be working on in the future. I've kind of got that gelled in my head, and I just needed to put it to paper. But if anybody finds themselves in that position, we want to be able to help them through that process in a way that is honoring and positive. And so that we want options to be available to them.
We do have a question in the chat. So to address the elephant in the room, what, if any, projections exist, is the impact of COVID on the future state budget? We have a perfect storm brewing. If this follows a logical conclusion, then what?
Yes, we do. So right now, I won't have your exact number. I'm not sure where to go and find it. The state is projecting millions of dollars lost, like 20 million lost. Lost not just in sales taxes, but also all sources of revenue to include property tax. So what we look at is where we are in our own counties, because that's our tax base. We know that oil just negatived. And so I just went through with Steve and just slashed some more budget items, because if the money's not there, we can't get it, and we need to be realistic about that. So the state budget is going to get cut. They've already been told that they cannot spend on anything unless it is directly COVID-19 related. They cannot hire. If someone retires, they're not filling that position. And that's just what I know right now. I think that as the weeks move forward, we will know even more. And we know that budgets are going to get hit. When I was working on, when I was working on the budget for CKLS, we did increase a couple of items because we know that our local libraries are going to get hit. And one of the easiest ways for you to save money is to spend less on materials. And so we added more, CKLS being we, added more to the rotating books collection and more to the digital books collection, because we know you'll be relying on that more. That's where we are right now. We also have some items in the budget that we can cut even more. Steve, I'm gonna guess, to me, the bottom line in your question is, you know, we've done all this work to realign the system grants all into one public library service grant, and then the school library service grants. Will that be affected? And the answer is no. No. CKLS we have more cuts that we can make within our own internal budget to make sure that libraries get the amount of money that CKLS is saying here that they should be getting. Was that ultimately your question, Steve?
Okay. Patty's just put in there a link to the Kansas budget shortfall. Yeah. And then there was another question. Can you speak to the declining populations in terms of CKLS funding? So this is a link that's also found on that grants page. It's on the basic grant, the system plan. And for budgeting for 2021, you can look at the potential grant, which you will receive in 2021. And the reason I'm pulling this up is because it'll kind of show you what could change. So with population. So this base grant is based on your service category. Once you're in that category, and if you lose, it's based on population or size of your town. If you grow, you can move up in a service category, but if you shrink in population, you wouldn't go in a smaller service category. So if you're in a linking and your population is now smaller into a gateway, you'd still be considered a linking library. And so your base grant would still be the same.
And that's where we are right now. If in 5 years from now, most of the gateways have not only dropped in population, but also in the services that they provide, we'll have to take another look at that. But this is where we are now. We're writing this strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years.
Right. And then the per capita grant is if your population is less than 400, your per capita is $300. And then there's bracketed all the way up where you get a certain number of cents, like 75 cents per capita, to figure out this formula here. So major service center, I'll just click on that one. So a major service center is 40 cents per capita per person in your, and that's why our census is so important, is because we base that per capita grant on those numbers.
And your new public library service grant will be based on those numbers as well.
Correct. Okay, I'll stop that again.
So Patty asked me to talk about declining populations in terms of CKLS funding. Patty, did Maribeth just address that?
Yeah, she's nodding yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm on a different screen.
That's why I knew what the answer was, but I wanted them to hear that they cannot change categories. Can't go down. You can go up.
Yes, and that's where we are right now. We've said in the past that we thought that would never change, but we don't have a crystal ball, and we do need to be responsible with the money. So that's where we are right now.
And no one predicted what happened a month ago. I mean, that's because that affects everything.
And if you're not monitoring chat, Patty put a link. The Kansas budget shortfall is $653 million.
Okay, so we also talked about in the committee, what is the long-term goals for CKLS? Where do you see CKLS in 10 years? And we're still working on that, and it's going to change, probably. Promoting CKLS services and consulting. The committee felt that there's still a lot of libraries out there that don't know everything that we do. And so that's one thing that we are really working on, is to make sure that you know all that we can do for you, and encouraging you, even if you don't think we have a service for that or can consult for that, ask and we will help you where we can.
Okay, I have a question. We're this budget time, and there's always the test, the 2 different ways. Yes. Is that being taken into account this year, or our board president had already visited with the city manager, and he had concerns about where the funding would be. Are we going to get penalized if our budgets, I
know what you mean.
Yes, okay. Because we kept our budget the same.
Right,
so,
and that's what anybody who's been contacting me, I've been advising that you're requesting the same dollar amount that you got before. The 2 tests refer to your eligibility for state aid, and you need to pass one of the 2 tests. One is the maintenance of effort, and the other is valuation. And so is your library's funding body, usually the city, giving you the same amount of dollar amount as last year? The other one is mill levy, and that is, did your mill levy stay the same or go up? You only need to pass one of the tests. Very early into this dilemma, this pandemic, I visited with the state librarian because I knew we were all entering into budget cycle, and I've had extensive talks with him about this. And I asked him, because we know, especially in those communities that have oil, that property valuation is going to drop, or because people are out of jobs, they're not going to be able to pay their property taxes on time. So even if the library's mill levy stays the same and the city levies for the same dollar amount, the library may not get all of that money because the city can't collect it. And so I visited with him about that, and I visited with a lot of boards that be prepared that you're going to ask for it, but you're not going to get it. And so I talked with him and I said, if a city needs to drop that library mill levy for the total overall tax dollars for the library because of this response, how are they going to be qualified for state aid or not? What's the bottom line there? And so he said that what the process would still be the same. As soon as you know, as a librarian, you would contact Maribeth or me, and we would work with you. Your city clerk would need to write a letter saying why that mill levy was dropped or why they decided not to levy for the same amount of money as you got last year. That gets submitted to the state librarian. The state librarian reviews it, and then he makes a determination. And I talked with him, and he said he's very well aware of what's going on in our communities, and he's not going to penalize any library for that this year, especially when it's an instance of not willfully violating what we call maintenance of effort.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does that answer your question, Cheryl, or do I need to, does anybody have any questions about that in particular? This is a very important point.
And I visited with my board president to go to the next step, you know, and he had visited with our city manager, and
Yes.
We've had a good relationship with the city, and which is great. And we know there's not going to be probably the taxes that
Correct.
the property taxes collected. And so, you know, I said to our board president that maybe in discussing with Jim, if we were, our budget was approved because it hadn't changed, we would be under the understanding we may not get that amount.
Correct. I'd count on it at this point.
Right. And that's kind of what we talked about before, and that as long as they approved it, we wouldn't be penalized by the state or
right.
anybody.
Right. So when you take your budget to the city, let them know why you're asking for the same money. Let them know that you're very much aware of the fiscal situation across the country, especially in your city, and let them know why you're asking for the same, but you fully expect that you're not going to get it, and you've got cost saving measures ready to put into place. I think that's real important. Right now, well, no, not right now. A few weeks ago, they were recommending that we plan on getting 15% less than we asked for. I don't know. I haven't seen a new number projected for that yet.
Okay. Well, that was my question, because we weren't raising our budget. We felt like we could exist on, you know, being approved the same, and but knowing that we probably would not get that amount.
I think it's a very sad state, but I think we're going to find out just how doggone thrifty librarians are. And I think we're also going to find out how little we can get by on and what really is essential for our community. There has been some important banter in the chat room. Laura DeBon, who is my counterpart at the Northeast Kansas Library System, does the 2 budget sessions in the Apple program for public library directors. We're not having Apple this year, but Laura is still going to do those 2 workshops, and she has volunteered to look over budgets for anyone in Kansas. I really recommend that you sit in on this. I watch it every single year because I learn more every single year. She is a budget guru, and she is really gonna help you with this. I really, really, really highly recommend that everybody go ahead and lock that in on your schedule. Invite board members to attend with you as well. If there are more than 5, remember, you can't talk specifics about library business. But they can all watch from their own homes, and then at your next board meeting, you can talk about business.
Okay, Gail, I have it on April 29th, library webinar. Is that hers?
Yes, and Maribeth is going to send out an email with that. And we also have those archived. We've had her do that for CKLS, and we have that archived as well.
Okay.
I just put in the chat box a link to last year's Apple archived workshop with the budgets. And so if you can't make the other ones, they're the ones from the year before, which would still be useful. And I believe these are going to be archived, but Northeast Kansas Library System is taking care of it, so I'm not sure when it'll be posted. But once it's posted, I'll share that as well.
Sorry, Maribeth, I don't mean to interrupt.
That's okay.
I'm terrible at it, you know that. And Steve says, this is what worries me. This is all uncharted territory. We don't know what this is going to do to the state economy, nor is it over and will be long lasting. And that's correct, Steve. I think we're going to really find out in 2021, especially, what essential services really are. We're going to have to really align ourselves with what our community needs. And there's no telling what that's going to be at this point. But I also know that as librarians, we are very resilient and we are responsive to our community. I'm positive that we're going to get through this just fine. We might be doing, well, I know we'll be doing it with less money, and so will you, but we're going to do it, and we're going to be great. We're going to come out of this, I mean, much the same way we are. Pew does a number of research projects on a regular basis, and they regularly do libraries. And I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, and it may have been as many as 5, but this is consistent across the line every time they ask, who are the most trusted entities in your community? And they're talking about like good use of money. They're telling us the truth. They're letting us know what's going on. The first is the military, the second are your first responders, and the third is always the library. We have a reputation, and it's one that's easy for us to uphold, and we will.
I did have another comment. My city office is not telling me anything. Almost our entire library mill levy pays for the salaries. I do not know how to figure out how to cut employee hours, including mine, until I know just how bad the news will be.
Was that just to you, or was that in comments?
It was just to me.
Okay.
Yep.
Contact me. Send me an email. I'll be glad to work with you. We'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. And it may very well be that you don't separate those items out as far as, and I think I know who you're talking about right now. I had this talk with you, madam. Right, and you're right to be worried about it. And I think you're going to have to look at realigning that. I think you're going to have to look at salaries out of CKLS money and salaries out of state library fund. And you're going to have to stop separating the library money in your mind. And you're going to have to kind of look at it a little bit differently. Worst case scenario is that hours will be cut, and that may mean that some people need to be let go. We are nowhere near that yet. Nowhere near it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right.
And I'll tell you, if it gets to that, give me a call. I have worked with a number of library boards and a number of librarians on humane and it's hard to say the words and not sound real trite, humane and compassionate ways to let someone go. And I'll walk you through that process. Nobody likes that. Nobody wants to do it, but I can help you with that process.
Okay. Sylvan Grove is in the same boat. My salary comes from the mill levy.
Right. And it may be that your salary needs to come from the CKLS money now and whatever else you get from the mill levy. Diane said, I have fired people and they say thank you. When I have had them hug and kiss me and they follow me on Facebook and they ask how I am, don't ask me where in the world that skill came from because I don't know. But it is one that I have and I'll be glad to help you with it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move the discussion forward, but I don't mean to hinder this one. If you have budget questions, we are here to help you with that. This second part that the Strategic Planning Committee came up with was to focus on the three main things that were important to our CKLS member libraries. They were resources and services, or what we're calling stuff. They were consulting, which we're calling staff, and they were money, which is grants. So we created 3 subcommittees, and those 3 subcommittees will meet. Should I do the members for each of those? Should I go ahead and tell
yes, and unfortunately, we created the subcommittees on a Wednesday, and Monday we closed. We left the building, and so I had to jump priorities, and we've not been able to meet yet. It is in the future, and it will happen. Hello, little girl.
There's a kitty. Okay, so for resources and services, we have Christy, Rachel, Jan Benjamin, that's who I forgot. Jan, Missy, Maribeth, and Gail. And Gail's going to sit on each subcommittee as an advisory role. For staff or consulting, we have Patty, Diane, Chris, Steve, Sherry, Holmes, and Gail. And then for money, we have Denise, Karen, Melissa, Brandon, Melanie, Maribeth, and Gail.
Yes.
And that's who and we'll list those. We'll send that out information as well.
Right. And what I envision us doing is they have the list of what we do now, and we're going to look at how things rate out in those strategic planning surveys, and what you as members and what your board as members consider to be essential and what is non-essential. And we're going to realign everything to those strategic planning results that we got.
And then the final point before we adjourn for the day, and we'll open up for questions, is that now the Strategic Planning Committee and its meetings are postponed. We felt like with the uncertainty, just as Steve was saying, with the uncertainty of what this pandemic is doing, we didn't feel like we could plan for the future when we're not even sure what the present is. So we have to postpone probably until we're back in the buildings. I don't know if maybe we'll postpone a little longer. It'll kind of be a gut thing with where we are, what the environment is like.
And so one of the things that I added to this is something called the 5 Ps, the letter P, as in papa, and they are position, plan, perspective, projects, and preparedness. And I've done a little bit of research about strategic planning in times of crisis, and that's where we are now. And so our true strategic planning has been put on hold because at CKLS we are working on those 5 Ps, and I'll just tell you about them now. I think we're being very transparent. You're quite aware of what we're working on, but I just wanted to have this for you. So position is, and these are things that you could be thinking about for your library as well. What position can you attain during and after the pandemic? What is your role here? Where do you think we're headed post-pandemic? And who is our competition? I think actually that one of our biggest competitions used to be Amazon. And I think that will be far less of a competitive force against us. It's not really against us. I think that I can't wait until the August statistics come out for number of new Sunflower e-Library. April number of new Sunflower e-Library patrons registered. I think that people are finding that we have digital resources, that they're easy to access, and they've already paid for those with their tax dollars. I think that they're enjoying those resources, and I honestly don't think they're going to stop using them. I think what's going to happen is they're going to start using print again, but they're going to keep using those digital resources. Our own competition is what we determine it at the local level, but just because you think you might not have any competition doesn't mean you do. The Great Bend Rec almost is in competition with us for summer library program because of some of the things that they can offer, and they have way more money to do it than we do. Look at that as the sort of things that we talk about with competition. Okay, what's your plan for bouncing back? What do we need to do today to be ready to achieve our goals tomorrow? As I said, I went through and I had presented the budget to the executive committee on Wednesday, and I thought about it and I thought about it, and I was kind of waiting on oil, and it happened. And so I went through and I really cut things again where necessary. And in my mind, I know where I can cut it again. That is my plan right now for bouncing back in 2021. However, what are the things that we can do to have you primed to bounce back? And I just, before this meeting and before I had lunch and my nap, got in touch with Boot Hill Distillery. Melissa, who is our executive committee member and strategic planning committee member, sent me the link, and I contacted Boot Hill Distillery, who stopped making as much whiskey and started making hand sanitizer. And I locked in, and Loretta is paying for it probably right now. We will have 60 jugs. Each jug is 2.5 gallons of liquid hand sanitizer that we will get. We will go and pick those up, and there is a jug for each library. I think Hayes and Salina, we're going to give you a couple. I'm going to visit with you first about that because you have so many people coming through. Yes, Andy, yay. I'm having Loretta pay for it because I didn't want a $4,800 charge on my credit card that said it was to Boot Hill Distillery. I didn't know how I'd explain that to my executive board. But those are for you. They have not been cut with alcohol. I mean, with a gel substance, they are 80% ethanol. There will be one for each library, and you'll determine how you're going to use that. I do have a very understanding executive committee, Sherry. I love them. The other thing that I'm working on today is disinfectants. It seems like I work on that a little bit every day, but my goal also is to put a nice amount of a disinfectant in every library, and a box of gloves if I can, and masks if I can as well. What we do in these webinars, what we talk about, is your fodder for how you're going to bounce back. When we rolled out the idea for reopening through a phased process, that was one way that you can start planning your own bounce back. We're on a trampoline here, and it feels just as shaky to me. We're down, but you know what? We are going to bounce back up again because that's how things work. How will your culture and identity change? This is so difficult right now. My fellow system administrators, when I visit with them and I see them on Zoom, they kind of are in shock. And it's because of this one, number 3. What will the library world look like tomorrow? Or when this pandemic is over? I don't know if it'll ever look the same as it always did, but we know it's not going to look like it did in 1960 when I was going to the library as a girl. We've gone beyond that. And you know what? We can look at this as tragic, which it is, but tragic to the library world, or we can look at it as an opportunity for us to retool ourselves and move forward. And that's where I invite you to start that line of thinking for yourself. Will the pandemic reshape how we operate and the services we provide? Absolutely. It already has, and it will. It's up to us how we react to this, if we choose to move forward positively, or if we want to really get bogged down in the negative. And then what new projects do you need to launch, run, and coordinate? I think you can see CKLS has really stepped up for that for you. That is those online board meetings, a weekly directors meeting, a lot of communication, sending a lot more information out to you so that you can share it out with your community. You're going to need to prioritize and coordinate those projects so that you can be stronger than ever before. Now, this next sentence is really important. And this is something that CKLS has fallen down on the ball in the past, and we try very hard not to, and that is beware of too many projects first. That's the problem. We have lots of great ideas, but we can't do them all. And especially too many projects that rely on key strategic people and resources. One person cannot do it all. You saw that on those subcommittees, I was on every single one of them. That's why we decided to postpone it. I can't do that and help steer all of you through this at the same time. And right now, this is the big priority. As the library directors, this sentence is key for you. You need to write it down, because when your libraries start to reopen again, your board and your community are going to push, push, push. Remember, you are only one person, you have limited resources, and you have limited hours. You're in it for the marathon, not the sprint. Too many new initiatives can place an unnecessary burden on resources. That would be you, and they can derail your success. We decided at Great Bend and at CKLS as well that we would not do an online story time. There was already a lot of stuff out there, and we needed to use those personnel in a very different way than they had been used previously. That's one of the key components of thinking there with the 5 Ps. The last one is, how prepared are you to execute your plans and projects? The resources available to you, along with the speed and quality of your decision-making process, and that's tough because your board only meets once a month, will determine who and how we achieve success or how we fall short of success. So how your library comes out of this pandemic and out of the economic downturn that is facing us for the next year or more really has a lot to do with your attitude and how fast your board is to make decisions and the resources that you have available to you. Any questions about the 5 Ps? Or about anything else? Yes, Steve, streamlined. And Patty says, in the past few weeks, Gail has reminded me of this, and I have had to remind her of that as well. Yes, yes. And yes, this is true. The Ps don't need TP. I don't mean to be your
coronavirus humor there.
Can we email out the 5 Ps? Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. I will put them in with the archive link that I send out tomorrow. I'll put that in the email there.
Right now, copy those and get them ready to send out.
Okay.
Okay, awesome.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. It was good to see all your faces and hear your voices again. We will have another library directors meeting next Monday, which I believe is the 27th. I can't think of dates right now.
Yes.
Yes, the 27th, which is Monday at 1:30. It will be archived and it will be sent out as well.
It can be just another cheerleading session, but if you have any topics you would like for us to talk about, sit down and send us an email and give us a day notice so we can prepare for them. We want to support you, and you need to let us know what you need so we can give you the resources you need or the tools you need to do that.
This is Patty. At that meeting on Monday, I've got a couple of summer library and programming questions that have run my way. So I will be talking about how we might count numbers and a little bit of what this might look like and what we're working on behind the scenes. So just so you're not worried about summer library, I promise you, I've been up nights worrying about it for you, so you can relax.
Okay, I just sent out the 5 Ps.
Okay.
And
I think we're good. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm going to stop recording.